The champagne bubbles were still dancing on my tongue, a final, fleeting taste of a perfect, golden afternoon, when the world ended. It didn't end with a bang or a crash, but with a whisper. A whisper from my best friend, my maid of honor, the sister I'd chosen for myself. Her lips were against my ear, her gardenia perfume, my wedding perfume, the one I'd let her borrow because we shared everything, clung to her like a lie. Her voice was a venomous, silken thread, meant for me and me alone, weaving a shroud for the future I had been living in just 1 second before. He was supposed to marry me. 5 words. That's all it took. 5 words, hissed with a lifetime of bitterness, to unravel the tapestry of my life, to expose every bright, beautiful thread as a fraud. My name is Elena, and this is the story of my wedding day. Not the one in the photos, the one with the strained smile and the dead eyes behind the veil. This is the story of what happened after the orchestra played, and before I could say I do. This is the story of the whisper. The 1-minute hook. The string quartet had just begun the first, tender notes of Pachelbel's canon. My father's arm was solid and sure beneath my hand. At the end of a petal-strewn aisle that seemed to stretch for miles, Liam stood waiting. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were fixed on me, and in them, I saw my entire future reflected back. A little house by the water, mornings with coffee and the newspaper, his laugh echoing in a kitchen filled with the smell of baking bread, children with his dark hair and my stubborn chin. It was all there. It was perfect. I took that first step, my heart a wild, joyful drum against my ribs. I was floating. I was flying. I was almost there. And then I saw her. Chloe, my maid of honor, my best friend since college, turned slightly from her place beside Liam. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking at the guests. She was looking directly at me. And on her face wasn't the tearful, joyous smile I expected. It was a look of such pure, unadulterated triumph that it stole the air from my lungs. It was the look of a winner who has just checkmated her opponent. My step faltered. My father tightened his grip. The music swelled. I reached Liam's side, my world already tilting on its axis. He smiled at me, a private, nervous smile meant only for me. The priest began to speak. And as Chloe stepped forward to straighten my train, her duty as my bridesmaid, she leaned in, her cheek brushing mine in a parody of affection, and she whispered the words that would become the scar on my soul. He was supposed to marry me. My world crashed. The silence after the whisper was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It was a physical pressure, a vacuum that sucked all the air, all the music, all the joy out of the quaint little chapel. The gentle hum of the guests, the sniffles of sentimental aunts, the rustle of programs, it all vanished, replaced by a roaring in my ears that was the sound of my own heart breaking. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was a statue in a bespoke ivory gown, a frozen monument to naivety. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were still locked on Liam's profile. He hadn't heard. His smile was still there, soft and slightly dazed, his focus entirely on the priest, on the sacred words that were about to bind us forever. Bind us. The phrase curdled in my stomach. Chloe. Chloe. I could feel the heat of her body just behind me, could smell that damned gardenia perfume. It was suddenly cloying, suffocating. The memory of this morning flashed, bright and painful, behind my eyes, us in my bridal suite, giggling like schoolgirls as we sprayed it on our wrists, our necks. Something borrowed, she'd said, her eyes sparkling. I thought it was a gesture of solidarity. Now I knew it was a brand. She was marking her territory, tainting my day with her scent. My mind, sluggish with shock, began to turn over, like a rusty engine struggling to start on a cold morning. It tried to reject the words. It was a joke. A terrible, tasteless, pre-wedding joke. Chloe had a wicked, sometimes dark, sense of humor. She loved to shock me. This was just her most extreme attempt yet. But that look on her face as I walked down the aisle, that hadn't been humor. That had been hatred, crystallized into a terrifying, gloating victory. The priest, a kindly older man with a gentle voice, was looking at me expectantly. He'd apparently asked a question. The entire congregation was waiting. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on my back, a weight of expectation. Liam turned his head slightly, his brow furrowed in a tiny, concerned frown. "You okay?" his eyes asked. My mouth was desert dry. My tongue felt like sandpaper. I tried to form the word "I do." It was a simple, two-letter word. I had practiced it in the mirror for weeks, imagining the myriad ways I could infuse it with love, with promise, with joy. All that came out was a faint, strangled sound. A mouse being stepped on. A nervous titter ran through the guests. Someone whispered, "Stage fright." Liam's frown deepened. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm and familiar around my icy ones. His touch, which usually sent currents of electricity through me, now felt like a betrayal. Was it his touch she had coveted? Had his hands, which now held mine, once held her face? Had his lips, which were meant to seal a vow to me, once whispered promises to her? The questions were a torrent, a flash flood in my mind, washing away the foundations of my reality. I had to get out of there. The thought was primal, an instinct for survival. I couldn't stand there another second, flanked by the man I loved and the woman who had just destroyed me, pretending everything was fine for the sake of a photo album. I wrenched my hand from Liam's. The movement was sudden, violent. His eyes flew open wide, startled. "Elena," he murmured, his voice low with confusion. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't look at anyone. My gaze was fixed on the heavy, oak door at the back of the chapel. Freedom. Oxygen. I needed oxygen. I gathered the acres of silk and tulle of my skirt in my trembling hands, and I ran. I ran away from the altar. Away from Liam's stunned, hurt expression. Away from the priest's open-mouthed astonishment. Away from the gasps of the congregation that erupted behind me like a wave. I ran past my mother's horrified face, my father's bewildered one. I ran down the aisle I had just floated up, petals crunching under my satin heels, now instruments of my escape. The sound of chaos erupted behind me, chairs scraping, voices raised in question and alarm. But I didn't stop. I hit the sunlight of the vestibule, blinding after the dim chapel, and shoved through the heavy main doors into the bright, indifferent afternoon. The limousine that had brought me here was still idling by the curb, the driver scrolling through his phone. He looked up, his jaw dropping as I stumbled toward him, a runaway bride in full, disastrous regalia. "Drive," I gasped, yanking open the door and practically falling into the back seat.
"Just drive."
"Please." To his credit, he didn't ask questions. He threw the car into gear and pulled away from the curb just as the chapel doors burst open again. I saw Liam standing there, his face a mask of anguish and confusion, surrounded by a crowd of my stunned family members. Our eyes met for a split second through the tinted window, a final, fractured connection, before the car accelerated, turning a corner and leaving my wedding, my life, my world behind. I didn't tell the driver where to go. He just drove, aimlessly, while I sat in the cavernous back seat, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. A stranger in a white dress stared back. Her mascara was beginning to smudge. Her carefully arranged hair was already falling in pieces around her shoulders. She looked pale. She looked broken. He was supposed to marry me. The words played on a loop in my head, each repetition a fresh stab wound. When did it happen? How long had it been going on? Was it before we were engaged? After? Was it a one-time mistake, a drunken fumble he'd regretted instantly? Or was it a full-blown affair, conducted in the shadows of our relationship, with my best friend as a willing accomplice? The questions were torture. Every memory I had of the three of us was now tainted, suspect. Our double dates. Our weekend trips to the cabin. The countless nights Chloe had spent on our couch, crying over some guy who'd wronged her, while Liam made her hot chocolate and I rubbed her back. Had that all been a lie? Had they been laughing at me behind my back? And Liam? God, Liam. How could he? He knew Chloe was my everything. He knew the story of my lonely childhood, how I'd always longed for a sister, and how I'd found one in the fierce, funny art student I met in a freshman literature class. He knew I trusted her with every secret, every fear, every joy. To betray me with her wasn't just a betrayal of our relationship. It was a violation of the deepest, most sacred trust one had. "Miss," the driver's voice was hesitant, filtering through the intercom. "We've been driving for a while. Is there somewhere specific you'd like to go?" I realized with a start that we were on the coastal highway, the ocean of vast, blue-gray expanse to our right. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was supposed to be the golden hour of our wedding photos. "Here," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just pull over here." He did, easing the long car onto a gravel lookout point overlooking the sea. I got out, the salt wind immediately whipping my hair and dress around me. The driver looked deeply uncomfortable. "I can't just leave you here, miss," he said. "You're in a wedding dress." "I'll be fine," I lied. "Thank you." I fumbled in the small beaded clutch I was still clutching like a lifeline and pulled out all the cash I had, a few $100s meant for tips at the reception. I thrust it at him. "Please, just go." He took the money, his expression a mixture of pity and relief, and drove away, leaving me utterly alone on the edge of the continent, in the most beautiful dress I would ever wear. The silence was immense, broken only by the crash of waves on the rocks below and the frantic beating of my heart. I walked to the railing, the cold metal seeping through my thin gloves. I looked out at the endless water, feeling smaller and more insignificant than I ever had in my life. And then I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, pouring all the pain, the betrayal, the rage, the utter devastation into the wind. I screamed for the future that had been stolen, for the past that had been poisoned, for the present that was a waking nightmare. I screamed until I had no breath left, and then I slid down to the gravel, my magnificent dress be damned, and sobbed until I thought I would shatter. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the air grew cold. The satin of my dress offered no warmth. I was shivering, numb inside and out. My phone, tucked into my clutch, had been vibrating incessantly for an hour. I'd ignored it. But now, as darkness began to fall, a practical, survivalist part of my brain kicked in. I couldn't stay on a cliffside all night. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the phone. The screen was a nightmare of notifications. 47 missed calls from Liam, 32 from my mother, 18 from my father, 15 from Chloe. Chloe. Seeing her name there, amidst the wreckage she had caused, sent a fresh wave of white-hot fury through me. How dare she? How dare she call me? To explain? To apologize? To gloat further? I clicked on her name. Her text messages flooded the screen. "Chloe, Elena, please. You have to understand. Chloe, it's not what you think. Chloe, please call me. Let me explain. Chloe, you're overreacting. You're ruining everything." I was overreacting? I was ruining everything? The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Then a new message popped up. Not from Chloe. From Liam. "Liam, Elena, my love, please. Where are you? I'm going out of my mind with worry. Whatever Chloe said to you, it's a lie. It has to be. Please just talk to me. I love you. I'm waiting for you at the chapel. I'm not leaving." A lie. The word was a life raft. A tiny, desperate, pathetic life raft in my sea of despair. Could it be? Could Chloe have fabricated the whole thing? Out of some twisted jealousy? She'd always been competitive, but this was monstrous. Was it possible that Liam was innocent? That this was all a vicious, cruel trick from a friend who had, for reasons I couldn't fathom, turned on me? The hope was so painful it was physical. I clutched at it. I had to know. I couldn't live in this limbo. I had to look him in the eye and ask him. I stood up, my legs stiff and cold. I had no money, no car, no way back. I started walking along the darkening highway, a ghost in white, thumb outstretched. It took 20 minutes before an elderly couple in a pickup truck, probably thinking I was some kind of performance artist or a very lost partygoer, took pity on me and agreed to drive me back to the chapel. The ride was a blur. I sat in silence, hugging myself, watching the world go by. The couple didn't ask questions, for which I was eternally grateful. When they dropped me off in the chapel parking lot, it was full dark. The place was deserted, the doors locked. The fairy lights that had twinkled so cheerfully just hours ago now looked sad and forlorn. But one car remained. Liam's familiar, beat-up Jeep. And there he was, sitting on the chapel steps, his head in his hands, his tuxedo jacket discarded beside him, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He looked utterly defeated. He must have heard the pickup truck pull in. He looked up, and when he saw me, he shot to his feet. His face was pale, etched with worry and exhaustion. "Elena," he breathed, and the sound was full of so much relief it cracked something open inside me. He took a step toward me, his arms opening, but I took a step back. I couldn't let him touch me. Not yet. "What did she say to you?" he asked, his voice ragged. "What could she possibly have said to make you run like that?" I stood my ground, the gravel crunching under my heels. The wind tugged at my veil. I felt like a specter from a tragedy. She whispered in my ear. I said, my voice surprisingly steady, cold as the night air. Right before I was to say my vows, she said, he was supposed to marry me. I watched his face. I watched for the telltale signs of a lie, a flicker of the eyes, a twitch of the mouth, a nervous swallow. I saw none of that. Instead, I saw pure, unadulterated horror. His face went from pale to ashen. He swayed on his feet as if I'd physically struck him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For a long, terrible moment, he just stared at me, his eyes wide with a shock that seemed to mirror my own. And in that moment I knew with a sickening, absolute certainty that it wasn't a lie. Chloe's words were true. His reaction wasn't the reaction of an innocent man hearing a wild accusation. It was the reaction of a guilty man whose deepest, darkest secret had just been violently unearthed. The life raft of hope vanished, and I was drowning all over again. "Liam?" I prompted, my cold voice breaking. "Was she?" He didn't answer with words. He just crumpled. He sank back onto the chapel steps as if his legs could no longer hold him, and he dropped his face into his hands again. But this time, it wasn't out of worry for me. It was out of shame. A raw, broken sound escaped him. It was the sound of a soul in agony. That sound was my answer. The facts, when I finally prized them from him, sitting there in the cold dark on the steps of the church that was supposed to have been the start of our life together, were both simpler and more complex than I could have imagined. There was no torrid, long-running affair. There was no secret life. There was one night, one mistake. It was about 8 months ago, he explained, his voice a hollow monotone, not meeting my eyes. We'd had a huge fight, a catastrophic one. About money, about future plans, about my reluctance to set a date. I'd stormed out, gone to my mother's for the night, and told him I needed space. He'd been devastated, convinced I was going to leave him. He'd gone out, gotten blindingly, stupidly drunk. And who had been there? Chloe. Always Chloe. She'd come over to cheer him up. One thing led to another. A moment of weakness, of profound stupidity, fueled by alcohol and fear, that he woke up the next morning filled with a self-loathing so profound he could barely function. He ended it immediately, told her it was a terrible mistake that could never, ever happen again. He'd begged her not to tell me, for all our sakes. She'd agreed. He thought it was over. He'd done everything in his power to forget it, to bury it, to pour all his love and energy into us. He'd proposed to me a month later, desperate to lock down our future, to prove to himself and to me that we were solid. And all that time, Chloe had agreed. She'd been my enthusiastic bridesmaid. She'd helped me choose my dress. She'd stood by my side, all the while nurturing the secret, this twisted belief that because they had slept together once, he was somehow hers. That their one-night mistake held more weight than our years of love, our shared life, our future. She had waited. She had bided her time. And she had chosen her moment with the precision of a sniper, the one moment when it would cause maximum devastation. She hadn't wanted him back. She had wanted to destroy us both. I listened to it all in silence. The cold I felt was no longer from the night air. It was internal, a permafrost spreading through my veins, freezing me from the inside out. When he was finished, he finally looked at me, his eyes pleading, full of tears. "Elena, it was the biggest mistake of my life," he choked out. "I love you. I have only ever loved you." It was nothing. It was a blackout. It meant nothing. I stood up. My body felt heavy, ancient. I looked down at this man I had loved with every fiber of my being. This man who had held me through my father's illness, who remembered I liked the crusts cut off my sandwiches, who made me laugh until I cried. This man who had shattered me. "It meant something to me, Liam," I said, my voice quiet, flat, final. "It meant everything." I turned and walked away. This time, I didn't run. I walked with a slow, deliberate purpose. I walked away from the chapel, away from him, away from the ghost of the woman I was when I woke up that morning. He called my name once, a desperate, broken sound that was carried away by the wind. I didn't look back. The aftermath was a special kind of hell. Telling my family, his family, our friends. The whispered explanations, the pitying looks, the awkward silences. There were people who took sides. Some blamed Chloe, the vengeful witch. Some blamed Liam, the cheating scum. Some, unbelievably, blamed me for overreacting and not being able to forgive a single mistake. I didn't care. Their judgments were background noise to the cataclysm happening inside me. I moved out of our apartment. I packed my things while he was at work, leaving my engagement ring on the kitchen counter. I went completely no contact with Chloe. She tried, of course. She sent long, rambling emails full of justifications and accusations against Liam, painting herself as the wronged woman, the victim of his seduction and my coldness. I deleted them without reading past the first line. I threw myself into work. I moved to a new city. I started therapy. The path to healing wasn't linear. There were days I hated him. There were days I missed him so much it was a physical ache. There were days I was consumed by images of them together, a horror movie playing on a loop behind my eyes. But slowly, agonizingly slowly, the ice inside me began to thaw. The all-consuming pain receded, leaving behind a scar, tough, resilient, a permanent reminder, but no longer an open wound. I learned a brutal lesson about trust, about the secrets people keep, and the devastating power of a single, well-placed word. The whisper on my wedding day didn't just end a marriage. It ended my innocence. It showed me that the people closest to you hold the power to hurt you the most profoundly. It's been 3 years now. I'm in a good place. I have a new job, new friends, a life I've built carefully, brick by brick, on a foundation of truth and self-reliance. I'm dating a little, though I'm cautious. Trust is a gift I now give sparingly. I heard through the grapevine that Liam moved away too. I hope he found some peace. I truly do. As for Chloe, I heard she's still in our hometown, still telling her version of the story to anyone who will listen, forever the tragic heroine of a romance that only ever existed in her own mind. The wedding dress hangs in the back of my mother's closet. She asked me once if I wanted to sell it, or burn it, or have it remade into something else. I said no. It's a relic now, a museum piece from a life that never was. I keep it as a reminder, not of the pain, though that's part of it, but of my own strength. I listened to the whisper that shattered my world. I stood in the wreckage, and then I chose to walk away.
Ich chose myself.
And that, in the end, was the vow I kept.